Hoggard Jazz.
I saw your interview with Howard Levy.
Oh yeah,
and that was great. And it was. I mean, I don't know Howard well, and we have not been in touch for decades. But I did have some playing with him.
Oh really?
When I first moved back to Brooklyn, we had a mutual friend, and that's where I first met him.
Oh wow.
And so it was great. I mean, you had a great conversation with him, and it was so lovely to hear him, speak about all kinds of stuff. It was marvelous.
I mean, we did one album together 4 years ago or 3 years ago already, and toured a little. And it's in a duo, guitar and harmonica. And I was like, he's such a cool guy. He did all these records, and when he talks about Paul Simon and Donald Fagen and all these guys, I'm like, wow, that's so much history there. And but it's same with you. You're on some of my most favorite records, and I really want to guide through some of these records. I mean, ask you about some things, and so thanks so much, first of all, for taking the time, and
thank you for asking
to chat a little about your music and everything. I have some questions, because I'm really curious how some things happen. So
sure.
But
I hope I have answers.
I think you do. How you play like 7 or 11 on an augmented something cool. But now, Jerome, I want to first ask you. Like, I think I saw you the first time live in Ljubljana in 1997 or 8 with Jack DeJohnette and Michael Caine, and I was just blown away, by that trio. I mean, Don Elias was usually on percussion the album Oneness.
Yeah.
But how you managed to stay. It will sound bad, but how managed to stay in time and still keep the pulse with Jack's drumming on that project. He's an amazing drummer, but in that project, I think, you're just like there. What is he doing everywhere? And I wanted to ask you, first of all, how did you get involved into that project of Jack, and how was it that for you?
Well,
to play with him.
Oh, it's amazing. Inspiring, eye-opening, challenging, fun.
Yeah.
Well, it's a little bit of the story has a little bit of length to it.
Yeah, please. Yeah.
I first played with Jack and first met him when I was working with Sonny Rollins.
Oh, okay.
There was one trip to, I believe it was just one trip to Japan. That band, Sonny during the time that I was with him, we would go to do a tour in Japan like once every year or every other year.
Yeah.
And on one of those trips, Jack did it. And
with Bob Crenshaw then on bass, or?
If I remember correctly, I think, let's see, now this is going back a while. I should check, because I played bass guitar
both,
with
I know.
Sonny,
Yeah.
For 7 years, and then for 6 years I played guitar with him.
Yeah.
And I don't remember for sure which. I think
I
was playing bass. Bass guitar. But anyway, sometime after that, Jack played on a few tunes on an album of Sonny's that I'm on, called Falling in Love with Jazz.
Oh yeah, exactly.
And so that was my first time in the studio with him. So now Jack likes to have a sense of what various younger than him players on the scene are doing. And so for good many years, he would invite people to go up to his house. He lives in upstate New York in the Woodstock area, a town near there. So he would invite people to come up and jam. Oh. And I did this with him over, a number of times, it'd be like, I don't know, once a year or once every 2 years, I get this call from Jack and ask, and it would be different players up there each time. And for the longest time, every time I left, I would feel kind of depressed. It's like, man, I don't know how to play with this guy. We're not hooking up. I'm getting lost. I don't know what's happening. I'm the saddest musician, So, but after a number of times of this, I realized some things. I said, okay, I realized that Jack always knows where he is in the meter and the time flow, even if he's playing things that are not obviously, arithmetically easily countable, and so trust him and don't try to, calculate, oh, that sounds like it's an 11 over 4 or something. Just keep time. And, when you get further, a few beats later or a few measures later, you'll be together. Yeah. And once I realized those things, then I found that I could relax and be, with him. And one other thing is that he has his version of what I first heard, really noticed that Elvin Jones would do, which is sometimes things would stretch a little bit and then come down, in terms of,
time or
the number of milliseconds in some bar of 4/4. And so you did have to have a little bit of similar elasticity, if you're trying to count like 1, 2, 3, then it may work out, it may not work out. But if you're more relaxed in terms of interpreting the meter in that way, but still count, don't think that he's, he's not always being like Jackson Pollock or something, So then once I realized those 3 things, then I felt like I could play with them. So one time in terms of this, the oneness band, there were a few times that when I went up to jam with Jack, there would be Michael Caine and some other people. And then at some point, Jack said that he was interested in he was thinking about putting together a band that, was jazz, but could also function in not strictly jazz, maybe what people are calling, world music contexts. And so at one point, it was when I went up to play with him, it was Jack and Michael Caine and Steve Gorn, who you may know, who's known for his Indian, music, Bansuri playing, but also plays soprano saxophone. I didn't know that. And so he was doing both at that jam. And so, so it's like, okay, and it was fun playing with them. I know Steve a bit from, the New York, world. So then at some point after that, I saw that the 3 of them, Jack, Michael, and Steve, did a Europe tour, without me. And it's like, oh, okay, well, they, put a thing together. And of course, they recorded an album for ECM, the 3 of them. So then after that, Jack contacted me and said, that was fun to do, but he wanted to make some changes in that project, and he did want to have bass, and he wanted to actually have percussion. And so he put together this group with me and Michael and a percussionist named Joachim Larty, who lived in the Hudson Valley of New York. And we did a few gigs. Then Joachim, for some reason, it was decided that he wouldn't do it. And Don Elias, who Jack has had, had a decades-long association with at that point, that Don was available. So Don joined that quartet, and that became Oneness.
Wow. Yeah.
And we did, I think it was 2 Europe tours in that format. We recorded the album, Oneness, for ECM. And then at some point after that, well, during that whole period, Don was also doing studio work, and he was touring with David Sanborn, and and the David Sanborn things are very popular, project. And so Don became just unavailable. He was just too busy doing these other things. And so we would, Michael and Jack and I would be rehearsing at Jack's place, and Jack has a number of percussion instruments, in addition to drum set lying around, and I'm a closet wannabe drummer. So and we had at that point, even with in the quartet format, we had evolved a way of playing where, we had compositions, we had tunes, but we also had these little motifs, many of them by Michael, that weren't fully fledged, fully developed compositions, but that could serve as material for to play segueing from tune to tune. And there was a lot of space for improvising in those. So sometimes, we'd be in, some of those motif areas, and I would, pick up, a pair of bongos or, whatever, some shakers or bells or something, and play a little bit, and then go back to playing either guitar or bass. And so, and Jack would say, "Hey man, it sounds good, man." So, so when Don stopped doing the gigs, we felt the lack of the percussion. And so I actually bought a number of percussion instruments and put together a setup, mounting some things on stands. And so, and of course, in the back of my mind, I'm saying, oh my God, I am playing percussion with Jack DeJohnette. I better get in the shed big time, and develop some better chops. Amazing. So I would be home, with my George, Lawrence Stone stick control book, and and trying to get, listening to timbali players and get some bell patterns going, and, just so I could hang, in a fruitful way. And so we did at least one tour in Europe where I was actually playing guitar, playing bass guitar, singing a little bit, and playing percussion. I'd be like the first person setting up on stage and the last person packing up, because I had all this percussion gear to pack up. In addition to the other stuff, but it was amazing. It was so much fun, and it actually cemented my back burner interest in percussion, in hand and stick percussion, which I try to maintain.
Amazing, man. No, it's so beautiful to see you guys together, how you played, because you know, especially with you on the bass, because it's a hard role to play in such a, you know, it's kind of like a piano bass drums trio, but it wasn't, absolutely no, you know.
Right, right.
That's why I wanted to ask you this, because that's when I saw you live and I was like, damn, that sounds cool. And the sound you have, you know, on the acoustic bass, it's really like,
the acoustic bass
so
guitar,
nice
yeah,
with the cymbals and I don't know, yeah, so cool. But Jerome, just since we're talking about drummers, I just want to ask you also one thing. I think you played on one of my top 5 records, which is the Rambler by Bill Frisell, and I listened to that one yesterday, and you know, Bill Frisell is up there with me as far as compositions, and Paul Motian, speaking of which, like one of the best composers for me. And I wanted to ask you, first of all, like, how was that? And Kenny Wheeler, of course, there also, yeah. You know, how did that project happen with Frisell, this Rambler, and how was the process there? Because it's such a magnificent one.
Wow. Well, Bill and I were both students in Boston during the same period of the, you know, middle to late 1970s. Yeah. He was at Berkeley. I was at New England Conservatory of Music, and we actually we even each played in 2 popular jazz funk, jazz rock bands led by trumpet players. There's a trumpeter named Tiger Okoshi.
Oh yeah.
He had a band called Tigers Baku, which Bill played in, and Stanton Davis, the trumpeter, had a band called Ghetto Mysticism that I played. So we knew each other slightly from, you know, the scene up in Boston at that time, and you know, then when we each wound up moving to the New York area, you know, independently, and, you know, knew that we were doing things. So Bill called me at some point and said that he had this recording to do and he wanted me on it. And I was thrilled, because this was actually, I think, my first time really working with him on his music. We did play together briefly in a band that Julius Hemphill, the saxophonist and composer, had. He had a group for a little while with, I was playing bass guitar, Bill Frizzell and Jack Wilkins, the 2 guitarists.
Really?
And there was different drummers. Most of the time, Mike Clark did it.
Wow.
A bit at a time, Michael Carvin played.
Oh, wow.
Anyway, matter of fact, there's going to be a recording, a set of CDs of Julius's music coming out, I think in a couple of months.
I'll have to check
and there will be some recording, I think a live recording of that quintet.
Oh, wow.
But anyway, you know, so Bill and I, we did know each other, but this was a new project, my first time playing, you know, Bill's music.
Yeah.
And initially, he was considering having, I think he maybe even called Al Foster to play drums on it, but something happened where Al couldn't do it. And so he got Paul Motian to do it. And so this was my first time ever playing with Paul.
Oh, okay.
And of course, my first and only time, you know, playing with Kenny Wheeler. And meanwhile, I had toured and, you know, and recorded in Bob Stewart's First Line band.
Yeah.
So, you know, so Bob and I had a, you know, working relationship, although I played guitar.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
So, and I had been in a couple of short projects here and there where there were 2 bassists, but not many.
Yeah.
And this recording, that turned out to be Rambler, was really fun, really inspiring, and really interesting, because we did rehearse, but not that much. And so the interaction between Bob Stewart and I, tuba and bass guitar, it was really interesting. And of course, being in a studio where you can really hear well, this was critical, because, we were doing this kind of, Tai Chi push hands thing, Bob and I, where, sometimes he would, go up high in the tuba's range, and, so he wasn't playing bass function. So I would be sure to go down into the roots and herbs zone, but then Bob would leave some space, and so I could play some counter lines, and of course the different timbres and attacks between bass guitar and tuba, where Bob sometimes could function really in a horn section way with the trumpet, and with Bill, playing his guitar synth on some of this stuff. Yeah. So you get these really sustained textures, and and then other times, and that of course that contrasts with the more pointy attack that you can get on bass guitar, but also I can so it was just so much fun. And Paul Motian, wow. Interestingly, in a very different ways, both Paul and Jack DeJohnette function, they play in ways where what they don't play
is almost the same.
It's absolutely exactly as important as what they do, the sounds that they choose to make.
Yeah.
And Paul's sense of space and his sense of phrasing that his spaces would allow and create. I mean, it was like Monk, I mean, it's a really, it was, and so of course, years later, I got a chance to play for a number of years in what Paul initially called his electric bebop band.
Yeah, you did Garden of Eden then, the album, right? Also.
Yeah. But many years before that, Steve Swallow was the original bassist in that band. And he would sub it out to me when there was some conflict and he couldn't do, a gig. And the situation evolved to where Steve would do the Europe tours, but I would do the New York, the Manhattan club gigs. Okay. So I became kind of like the local guy. And so we played, that band played, at least once a year for a number of years at Sweet Basil, and I see you've got the T-shirt, yes, or at Birdland or at the Village Vanguard, and my opportunity to do, and we played with a number of different players. I mean, I think Chris Cheek was there for every gig that I did with that band. But the other saxophonist that we did initially, oh God, of course, his name's popping out of my head for some dumb reason. But anyway, we did it with Mark Turner. We did it with Tony Malaby.
Tony did it,
and we did it. Chris Potter was the original, other saxophonist. When I first joined, it was Brad Shepik and Wolfgang Muthspiel.
Oh yeah.
Did it, and then Kurt Rosenwinkel did it for a while.
Steve
and
Cardenas.
Then I don't remember the order, but you know, Ben Monder and Steve
Yeah.
Cardenas and
Yeah.
Jakob Bro would come
Yeah.
over from Copenhagen to, you know, to do the gigs.
Amazing, yeah.
So
yeah, no, incredible.
so much, and then it turned into a larger group, you know, because he added Jacob Sachs playing piano and Matt Maneri.
Matt told me about that.
5-string, you know, violin, viola. So, and you know, Ben Street would be the other bassist. We did it a few times with Thomas Morgan. So I got to play with a lot of different great,
beautiful
folks in that situation.
Yeah, no, beautiful. Yeah, I just wanted to ask you these things because, you know, especially Rambler and the Garden of Eden, there are such nice records. I mean, like, you know, Paul was really, you know, I transcribed so many of his compositions, just the hats, and, you know, because it's so simple, but it's so deep in a way. And
he took his composing seriously, and you know, you can see it in the richness of what he wrote. And you know, there actually now, since he passed away, there are now 2 books of his compositions.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, you know, in his own hand.
Oh wow!
That are published. There's a volume 1 and a volume 2.
Oh wow! Okay.
And I'll be sure you get the information on.
Yeah, I need to check that. Wow, shit.
Yeah.
But Jerome, I really want to go a little bit back because when I started with jazz, you know, one of the first records I actually bought was also hidden in plain view in the 90s. Really?
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
No, I love that record. I mean, I will ask you about that one. You know, I started with jazz and I quickly dug into Eric Dolphy and DeJohnette and all these guys. And, you know, then I saw you guys did Eric's music and Dolphy's music, and I was like, wow, okay. And I loved then all the players starting investigating. But what I wanted to ask you, I was in the beginning really confused because I thought it's 2 guys in the beginning, one who plays guitar and one who plays bass. But then, of course, I know this sounds stupid, but
not at all, no.
Because you're so good on every instrument, and I wanted to ask you, like, how did this story with playing bass and guitar happen with you? That you became actually, like, both are in a way your primary instruments, or?
Yeah, they both are.
They are, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, to go back to the very beginning, I mean, when I was, you know, younger than a teenager, I don't remember exactly how old I was. I guess I was about 11 or so. You know, I was always interested in music, you know, hearing stuff on the radio and this and that. And at some point I wanted, well, in public school in New York City, you know, there used to be, you know, it was fairly common for there to be some instrumental music in the, you know, particularly when you got into middle school, you know, 7th, 8th, 9th grade or so. And I wound up in a school and in a class in a school where you had to play a bowed string. It had to be, you know, violin, viola, cello, or bass. I was interested in alto saxophone or flute, but had to be one of the bowed strings. And so I picked violin, and I was terrible at it. And I really wanted an instrument that I could accompany people on and accompany myself when singing.
Oh, okay.
And we couldn't afford a piano. And of course, there's a lot of music with guitar in it, you know, in popular music during the 1960s. And so I bugged my parents to get me a guitar, and they got me a guitar. So I had that and a book, and I was trying to teach myself to play.
The chords and
Yeah. So meanwhile, some folks in my neighborhood, friends in my neighborhood, had some instruments, and you know, we would get together and try to play together at this one guy's house, and he had a bass guitar. And sometimes when we would get there, he wouldn't have gotten there yet. And so, I kind of, just picked up the bass and said, oh, well, okay, it's tuned like the four low strings on the guitar, but just down an octave lower. And so, and I found that I enjoyed that, messing around on bass, but I didn't own one. And I didn't actually get one until I was in college.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, where I went to Harvard College, and there was a chorus of the other African American students called the Kuumba Singers, which actually still exists, and they needed a bass player, and so I said, well, if I can get a bass, I'll play bass with them. And so that was the beginning of my spending any regular time on bass. I mean, I was already, through high school and such, playing in little bands in my neighborhood and playing in the high school's folk song club, which was kind of a whatever acoustic music club. It's the first place I heard of Doc Watson, heard of, Bill Monroe and bluegrass and all that music, which I still love to this day. And so I started playing, bass in college, and was also following up, spending some time, exploring from a listening point of view and increasingly from a playing point of view, jazz.
Yeah.
And I found with some friends showing me some things, my jazz playing on bass got better faster than my jazz playing on guitar. I mean, I just didn't really, because I was still completely self-taught through this whole time.
But on bass and guitar, you were self-taught, right?
Yeah. All throughout this time. And, so there's a lot of things about, details of how harmony works and how to, manifest all of this stuff on the guitar that I was kind of scratching at and trying to figure out, but it was going kind of slowly, progressing, but slowly. Fast forward a little bit, I was majoring in a field that they called at the time at Harvard social relations, and it was really social psychology, within that department. And I finally figured out that I didn't want to become an academic social scientist. And the other key thing is that I was spending many hours working and hanging out at the school's radio station, which had and has a wonderfully deep and broad record collection. So, it'd be like, Josquin Desprez. Oh, I've heard of him in some music history course. Oh, let me actually listen to some more of this. Oh, who's the Cecil Taylor? Conquistador, Unit String. Whoa, what is this? Jelly Roll Morton.
Yeah.
Oh, they had, many of the None Such Explorer series records, the None Such Records, label, which put out in the US, a very notable series of recordings of various musics from around the world.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah.
Javanese and Balinese gamelan stuff, and things from various regions in Africa and South America. Anyway, so I was soaking up all of this, and that experience of doing all that listening and discussing it with other students at the radio station, more than anything, cemented my choice to decide, okay, I'm not going to become a social scientist. I'm going to try to teach to become a functional musician by going to a music school. And so I applied to Berkeley and to New England Conservatory. I got admitted to both. New England is the place that I really wanted to go to. And luckily they gave me some scholarship money and Berkeley did not. Yeah. So that, you know, yeah, there was the choice.
Yeah, but it's amazing. But yeah, that's incredible. That's the story. Like I'm the same, you know, I studied American poetry and then, you know, became a professional jazz musician and teacher. And but and I love this with you when I read that. I was like, wow, that's so cool, man. You know, that this happened. But I wanted to ask you, since you mentioned listening to records, right? You remember some of the first like jazz records that really kind of blew your mind, which were like, you know, you said Cecil Taylor, okay, or which were the records, I don't know, that you still remember now when you put them on and you was like, what the, you know, is this?
Well, wow, there are so many. Well, first of all, I'll mention that before, there were some that influenced me in a less, I guess maybe in a more subtle way. There were some records that my parents had. They were not huge jazz fans or not huge music fans, but they enjoyed music and particularly singers. So they had some Nat King Cole, you know, King Cole Trio records.
With Oscar Moore, man, I love Oscar Moore.
Yeah, they had some Dinah Washington records, and they had several records by the Philadelphia organist. She also played piano, but mainly known as an organist, Shirley Scott. And Stanley Turrentine was on some of those. And so that, I think, subtly influenced my taste in jazz. Some friends of mine in high school turned me on to two records by Herbie Mann, the flutist. One of them is a record that no one really knows called Today, which had a band that he had going on for a while at that time that had a significant Afro-Cuban influence. Carlos Patato Valdez was the conga player, and there was vibraphone by Dave Pike and two trombones, which a number of salsa bands, you know, I think he must have gotten that influence from, you know, the salsa world. It's my guess anyway. Chick Corea played on those records. And so, and the Herbie Mann Today album, had arrangements by Oliver Nelson. And that put Oliver Nelson's, you know, name in my head. And a few years later, someone turned me on to the album called The Dynamic Duo with Jimmy Smith and Wes Montgomery.
Oh yeah, sure.
That and that record is arranged, you know, it's got a big band arranged by Oliver Nelson. And that is such a gorgeous, grooving, intense, rich album. I mean, and I've been meaning, this is on my long list of things that I intend to get to at some point. There's a version of the tune Down by the Riverside on that album. And, you know, Jimmy Smith takes a chorus, takes a solo, Wes takes a solo, and Wes ends his solo playing two choruses of and it's basically a blues form that they're soloing on, but he plays two whole choruses of dotted quarter notes, you know, doing 1 2 1 2 3 dun, 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 dun. Block chords the whole time. Dun, 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 you know, the two whole choruses like that of
playing across
chords.
Over.
And it's like, man, it's great.
Yeah.
So that's one an album, and a moment in an album that still sticks with
That's
me.
Beautiful. Yeah.
I aspire to getting my chord soloing, as free and expressive, as that.
Yeah.
Let's see.
Did you ever check also the all these guys like Grant Green, and did you go through that school as well? Like, yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. I mean, they got so many people. Larry Coryell. Another record. Larry Coryell. Now, I didn't hear his, I guess it's 2 albums with Gary Burton's band until a little bit later, until I was in college. But he did a record for the Vanguard label called Lady Coryell.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And that there was one, I think, a couple of tunes on that record actually got airplay on what they called at the time called progressive FM radio in the U.S. And there was a station in New York that was originally WOR FM, which later changed its its letters to WNEW FM, and they would mix some jazz in with the rock and R&B and funk and whatever they were playing at the at the time, and there were a couple of cuts from that Larry Coryell album that I heard, and I wound up buying the record, and that stuck with me.
Wow.
Other things from other angles. Leo Kotki.
Oh wow, yeah.
Leo Kotki and John Fahey, who are fingerstyle.
Yeah, Leo Kotki is amazing. I know him.
Yeah. Both of them in related and somewhat different ways. I mean, Kotki, I think it would be fair to say, was a more advanced technical guitarist than John Fahey, but much of Kotki's aesthetic is in a lineage from John Fahey. And if you go, earlier than John, John was, listened to, Charlie Patton and Mississippi John Hurt and Skip James, those, African-American, Southern, blues and songster guitarists. And I'm not even sure how to put it into, how to state it verbally, but there's something very compositional, and it's almost as if John Fahey is kind of like the Satie, the Eric Satie
wow, that's nice.
of the American vernacular acoustic guitar culture. And this might be stretching things a bit, but maybe Leo Kotki is the Debussy, or the Ravel. I mean, I don't know.
No, I know what you mean. I know what you mean. Yeah.
Fahey is a lot starker.
Yeah.
And I have a very particular appreciation for music that is simple but rich. There's something about the economy and the clarity of some music that, if you actually really look at it, there's a lot going on, sometimes rhythmically or timbre wise or harmonically, but it's the richness of it is stated using not so many notes. I mean, Frizzell is a example of that for sure.
Yeah.
And John Fahey is also an example of that, you know, his playing and his composition. So
interesting. Yeah,
there's a lot of beautiful music in the world.
Oh yeah, man. I'm discovering every day. Like I find new things, and I'm like, wow, you know, which is beautiful. Yeah, new musicians coming up, and even from the, you know, back the older days, you always found out about new albums and new records, and I'm like, wow, Jesus, why didn't I hear about that one? You know?
Yes, yes.
Speaking of like these experiences, do you remember like the first, let's say we're talking about mid 70s or late 70s, the first jazz concerts kind of that blew your mind that you saw them? Do you remember which guys you saw live? Like,
well, there were a number. I mean, I was lucky that, I was lucky to be around during that period, and I was lucky to be going to school in Boston during that time, because Boston, you know, was a major destination for, you know, touring jazz artists, just like New York or you know, Philadelphia or, you know, wherever. And so I saw one of Miles Davis's, you know, electric bands. You know, I saw him with Chick Corea, Keith Jarrett playing organ.
Oh wow. That's cool.
I think Gary Bartz, if I remember correctly, was playing in that particular group. So I saw them. I saw Ornette Coleman.
Oh really? Oh wow.
With Dewey Redman and Ed Blackwell and Charlie Hayden at a club in Boston.
That was amazing, right, Charlie?
Oh wow.
Yeah.
I did get to see Cecil Taylor play solo. Actually, he came to Harvard and played a concert. And along with the concert, I was actually working on the stage crew, and I got to be in the hall when Cecil was warming up. And that kind of really blew my mind, because he was playing, I mean, he was improvising, but he was playing everything in, you know, two-handed, you know, octaves. So I mean, ding 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 ding. But the whole, I mean, you know, it's astounding. It was astounding.
Wow.
The first time I saw Sonny Rollins actually wasn't in Boston. It was here in New York, you know, during some vacation period when I had come back home, and I found out that he was, you know, playing. I'm forgetting the club, but the club is no longer exists. But I went, and that scared me half to death. Because he was doing this thing that he did for a while. Luckily, he had stopped doing this by the time I wound up working with him, where he played the ace. Okay, he wasn't announcing any tunes, no titles, you know. So he'd come out and he'd start playing, you know, an intro, and at some point he'd play the melody for some tune. So there's like, okay, the A, so then they play the A section of that tune. But when he got to the bridge, he would play the bridge of a different song.
Wow. Wow.
And then it might be like the next A from yet a third song.
Oh, Jesus.
And I'll never forget, it was Walter Davis Jr. on piano, David Williams on bass, and David Lee on drums. And a number of times you could see Walter Davis, you would furrow his brow, you know, trying to think, what is that tune? And then he would get it, and he was able to stay with Sonny pretty well. You know, a couple of little hesitations like that, but then a few times, you know, the bassist just had to stop, because it's like, what the hell, you know, song is this? I can't figure, you know. So
incredible.
And I was like, man, if that's what happens in the professional leagues. Forget it. I'll never get there.
You mentioned Sonny now, right? And I saw the other day like this footage of you guys playing with Al Foster is on drums, and I think Mark Soskin is on piano. And I think it's from 1980 Jazz Jamboree or something.
Yeah, in Warsaw.
Yeah, and there's this one version of "Keep Hold of Yourself" when people are just like screaming and you playing, and it's just the energy you guys, and then you see you're like really biting in there and burning. But I wanted to ask you, like, how does the story with Sonny first begin? How did, because it was such a long 10, 12-year-olds or even longer relationship.
Yeah. It was luck. I had graduated from New England Conservatory, and I, was living in Boston. I figured I would, stay in Boston for a number of years and, work and practice and try to assimilate all of this information that had been thrown at me during my 4 years of music school, some of which I could assimilate as I went, and some was like, okay, I got to actually spend more time exploring this stuff. And one day I get this phone call, and the person says it's Sonny Rollins, and I'm like, okay, yeah, who are you really? What friend of mine is pulling a prank on me? But it was Sonny. And he said he was coming up to play at this prominent at the time jazz club in Boston called Paul's Mall. But he needed a sub on bass for one night.
Okay.
I don't know what, I don't remember who the regular bass player was in at the time. I've forgotten. I used to know, but he couldn't do. He had a conflict with one night of that week's engagement, and Sonny had called a teacher and pianist, organist who taught at New England Conservatory named Webster Lewis, who Sonny knew a bit, and he had asked Webster for a recommendation for a sub, and Webster, who I had done some work with, recommended me. And so, Sonny said, go out and buy my, most recent album. We'll do a few tunes from that, and we'll get together the day on the afternoon of that performance and go over some things, and then we'll hit that night. And that's what we did. And it was just, I've thanked Webster's passed away, years ago, but I, thanked him for, suggesting me. And after we did it, some weeks later, Sonny called again and had more work for me to do. And that was the beginning of my being in the band.
Wow. And how was it like to play in that group? I mean, first as a bass guitarist, how was the energy? How was it work? Was it like to work in that group? I mean, like, if you can describe that, because it seemed like really fun, but also intense in the same time.
Yeah, exactly. That's what it was. It was fun and it was intense.
Yeah.
Sonny was very self-critical.
Oh.
He didn't bestow praise or encouragement, easily. He would, but not that often. And he had high standards. Mm-hmm. And it was just, and it was intense. The energy level was really high consistently. Yeah. Wow. And his focus was very sharp consistently. And he wouldn't often say in much detail what he wanted.
Yeah, that's what
how he wanted us. Yeah, I mean, this is something of a generational, subcultural, and then I suppose just individual, aspect. I mean, some people are very comfortable, saying, hey, would you like voice this a little higher here in this section, or leave more space there, or feel free to jump in, whatever. Some people are very comfortable giving that sort of verbal direction, and other people really do not want to. It's like, okay, I'm hiring you because I like what you do, but if there's something that I don't like, it's up to you to figure it out.
Oh, yeah.
And Sonny was more that way. He would say when he didn't like things, but wouldn't so much say, oh yeah, you were really grooving on that tune, I really love that solo, or do more of that or less of this. He wouldn't do that very, very often. Yeah, occasionally, and there were even occasionally some written notes that I would get, but so at times, me tending to be a linear thinker in a certain way. I mean, I kind of, before I was decided in college to study social sciences, I was really a physical science person. I thought I was going to be a chemist,
Oh, wow.
And so pretty detail oriented and observing the physical details of things, introspective a bit. So sometimes the way that Sonny functioned as a band leader would be challenging, was challenging for me.
Imagine,
But then I learned so much just being on the stand, listening to him.
Yeah.
It was really like being in graduate school, in a way.
Imagine,
And, and so often, I mean, that man would do, I mean, I sometimes say it this way, that man would do more with 3 pitches and rhythm, 3 pitches and phrasing. He would say so much, more than people, some people was, I mean, Sonny he could do that too when he chose to, but just where he would place what he played in the time flow, in the meter frame,
phrasing
carried so much flavor. And that was really inspiring.
But how did it, because then I saw some footage with you playing guitar with Sonny, and what changed for you when you switched from bass to guitar? How did you feel the change? Or
well, I mean, of course, the function in the band obviously is different.
Was it easier in a sense, or I mean, not easier, but like, how would you describe the difference?
Well, for me, it was more, I would say, I guess I would say it was more, it's certainly a different challenge, and perhaps more challenging, because the bass, the bass function is so often very clear. You're serving it in a way as, obviously as part of, the stating of the rhythm, and the pulse along with the drummer.
Yeah.
And you're what you play defines and articulates, manifests the harmony also.
Yeah.
But it's all single, pretty much all single notes, so it's this linear thing and it has this melodic sense, but it's pretty clear, and it's all, and to a large degree, bass function is the same from genre to genre. I mean, there are details that are different, but what the bass is doing in the ensemble often is.
That's true.
The fundamentals of it are the same from genre to genre. Whereas guitar, and particularly if you're the guitarist in a group with another chordal instrument, piano, which, piano has more weight of sound, it's got, a wider register range. It can go lower than the guitar and higher, pitch-wise than the guitar, and can sustain notes. You can go boom, ding, and this thing rings. Guitar. You don't have that. And in Sonny's band, it became very obvious that the piano was the primary chordal instrument in importance. There would be times when, Mark, it was usually Mark Soskin who was in the band when I was playing guitar, and so he would sometimes, lay out and let the guitar comp, or play more sparsely. But Sonny really did want to hear the piano a lot. I was functioning, when Sonny would hand off soloing to me, I was a soloist. And often I'd be trying to find a role.
Yeah, like a space in between.
Yeah. So so it's like, okay, I would play, some short, kind of almost like horn section, stabs, do that a bit. Okay, I'll do that just in the bridge, and I won't play during the A sections. Or here I'll do it, in the first A. It's like play a little motif. I had to kind of find
like counterpoint and stuff.
And trying to do that without conflicting with how the pianist is interpreting the chords, and trying to do it in a way that doesn't crowd Sonny. That was challenging, and I'm glad that I had that riddle to solve, because it made me, it certainly raised my awareness of of that job. And it's basically, you can think of it as a improvising arranger role. And ideally, I mean, I really enjoy being in bands where everyone in the group is aware of that role, and we can arrive at, from a moment to moment, tune to tune, day to day, night to night, understanding of how we want to manifest that. So people will step up and someone will step back. And, during the course of the tune, or from tune to tune, maybe, okay, this person who was more in the foreground of the accompaniment will step back, and someone else will step forward. And it could be anyone. It could be the drums, it could be the bass, it could be the guitar, the piano, whatever. So that, I think I certainly, my experiences playing more, for lack of a better term, free jazz, certainly influenced my sense of the possibilities and the value of that sort of awareness. Often in musics where the roles of the different instruments are more conservatively, traditionally defined. You may not have as much flexibility in terms of making those sorts of choices. And it's like, okay, so the guitar is playing tank, or whatever, and there's fun that can be had in that, but there's a different kind of fun and different type of challenge when the roles were not so constrained. And so it was interesting working with Sonny. You had to respect his taste and his vision about that. And at the same time, you're trying to also bring yourself to it. And so it was fun and it was challenging.
No, I can imagine, because it's interesting because you were part of this amazing New York downtown scene, let's say, with all these incredible musicians. I have you on, like I said, on so many records with Bobby Previte, Marty, Ehrlich, and the list goes on, and then at the same time see you playing with Sonny Rollins, which is like a complete, of course we're talking about Sonny Rollins, but music wise at that time in the 80s, what he was playing, it's something completely different than the New York downtown scene, and it's quite cool to see you functioning in both of these aspects actually at the same time. So it's quite
I feel really lucky that I have had this range of opportunities. And I mean, I do have broad tastes in music. I mean, I'm happy to put on, Beyonce at one moment, and Schoenberg, Sechs kleine Klavierstück, another moment, and so
that's so important.
I mean, it's interesting because it is following, being true to a breadth of interests is demanding, because you want to come to them each honestly and not in a way that belittles what they are or belittles a sense of what I can do with the music. And so I'm absolutely a constant student. And I enjoy that. And sometimes it's a bit annoying because I feel like there aren't enough hours in the day to really get into the musics that I'm interested in at a sufficient level for what I would like to do. And I'll give you one example, among a bunch. I've found music from the Middle East intriguing for a long time. Here's a very, maybe it feels a little bit trivial, but I was in a taxi cab coming back to Brooklyn from someplace in Manhattan, and the driver had on, this is back when, cassettes were, the thing. And he had this music that he was playing. And I was like, man, what is that? That's really kind of cool and interesting. And I asked him, what is this music that you're playing? And he said, it's this guy named Amir Diab, who is a huge Egyptian pop star, singer. And, I said, well, man, can you tell me the name of this this album, this cassette. And so I jotted it down, and I found a store that had it, and I bought it. And I still love it. I mean, he's had, this is like decades ago, but this record called Martefiche. And this was kind of an intro for me to Arabic music. And of course, this stuff is pop, but there would be these lines in it. Some of them played on keyboard, some of them, played, on nai, or that, where, okay, there are these notes that are in a different intonation than Western intonation. It's like, man, what is that? That's really cool. Fast forward some decades, I found there's a violinist in town here named Sami Abu Shumais, who was teaching classes in Arabic maqam at this Middle Eastern Arts and Culture Center. And I took his class a number of times, and then there started to be like all this information on the web going into great detail about the maqam system, the scale and melody, system in Arabic music. And of course, there's Iraqi maqam, and it has this relationship to the Turkish music, and and I aspire to putting more time into actually learning some pieces, and I actually even went insofar as to having the frets removed from a old guitar that I have, so you can actually, play. And there's a organization called Brooklyn Maqam that has these performance. Well, now of course everything is shut down, so they're inactive at the moment. But they were having these performances at a bar restaurant walking distance from my house, and they would have a jam session, and they've even now published lists of, okay, if you want to be able to play in these jams, here are some pieces to learn. Here's like some vocal pieces, and here's some instrumental pieces, simple, and then some more advanced. And on my long list of things that I want to do is to pick some of these tunes and try to actually learn them, so I can get more hands-on and ears on into that tradition. Music. So we'll see.
So many things to do. But Jerome, just one more question, not to take too much of your time, but I mentioned Hidden in Plain View, right? And it's Eric Dolphy's music, but then there's this song Emanations that you wrote also. And I wanted to ask you, like, if you still compose music or write music, and how come you were not so much active anymore as a band leader than later? Because those records are so beautiful. I mean, that record for me, maybe because I was a teenager at that time, and records when you're a teenager, then they stick with you, right? And, but this is one area I would like to ask you. What's the story there in a way?
Well, there are a few things I can say about that. I tend to be a slow composer, slower than some people, and I have not yet done what many composers who I've spoken to, colleagues and even some teachers have said, which is to approach composing like you approach your instrument. Do a little bit every day. Write something every day, and you can approach it almost like a journal, like, you write something, and then some things you may come back to and choose this to develop further. If some opportunity to complete something, recording situation or what have you, you're in some band and they're open to composition, you have some work, some nuggets that you can use to, oh, well, this might fit. I haven't yet done that.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. Another aspect is that I really do enjoy being a collaborator. I really enjoy playing other people's music. And when the opportunities come up to do it, I really do throw myself fully into it, and that takes a certain amount of time and attention. And I also take my responsibilities in other areas of life seriously, as being a spouse, and our daughter is full adult, and she's out of the house for years, and so no longer an active daily parenting duties, but that was very serious and taking time and attention, and even other things, particularly during this the worldwide virus crisis. I've actually gotten very deeply involved in some musician activism work. There's an organization called Music Workers Alliance that I'm part of, which is pushing at the local, New York City level, the New York State level, and the federal level for policies that and in the business world, not directly dealing with government, although some of this gets into some law changes that we would like to see. But we are working on trying to improve the working circumstances, working conditions of DJs and instrumentalists and singers and composers and arrangers and sound engineers and such. And that's been really fascinating and thought-provoking. I've been learning a lot. The guitarist Mark Rebo, I blame him because he's the person who asked me, you got me into it. And now I'm at least knee deep, I'm waist deep.
That's good.
And so, and I guess, I feel, some responsibility to try to, help in ways that I can, I feel, I don't feel it. I've got a lot of music that I want to do, and will be doing, and hopefully in the next year, look at my Bandcamp page, because I'll be slowly dropping some things there. But I do take my role as a citizen of the planet, seriously, and so beautiful. So anyway, those are good excuses for not composing.
I think so too. I think so too, man.
Dr. Jazz. Dr. Jazz.